So you just got your Switch 2 for the first time, and that could be from Christmas that just passed or maybe some other event, right? But either way, you got your Switch 2 and now you're trying to look around and figure out what's next. Well, what I wanted to do here was go over some things you need to know about your system, and this is mostly knowledge that I've accrued over the last 6 months, really since the system came out, and a lot of questions that have come up since then. While the system is for the most part straightforward, there are some odd quirks and features here and there that can kind of go under the radar that I wanted to go over here today. So if you guys enjoy the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new. Let me just stop for a minute and tell you about today's sponsor, and that's Belkin with their Switch 2 charging case. And look, I can tell you about all the different features with this case that maybe you've heard elsewhere. Inside, you have a space for cartridges. Here, you can store up to 12 of them. It also has a nice compartment at the top where you can put different cables or other accessories. And there's an AirTag pouch, which is nice because then you can keep track of where your Switch 2 is. And don't let the inside of the case fool you with its nice felt and soft design. On the outside, it's tough and rigid and will protect your Switch 2 with different drops and other things that can happen there with impact. And it has a nice handle here to carry the Switch 2 around. I know the thing to me that really sticks out about this case is the fact that it stores an entire battery bank at the bottom. So for me, when I use this case, if I'm playing my Switch 2 when I'm out and about, and maybe I use up 50% of the Switch's battery, when I go to store it away, I use the right angle cable, and I can plug the Switch 2 in, store it, and then the next time I go back, it'll be 100% charged. The nice thing about this battery bank in particular, it's able to charge the Switch 2 1.5 times. So for the most part, when you're out maybe through the day, or even on an entire trip, and you have a chance to charge the battery bank again, you'll be good to go all day. It certainly makes a good gift for someone maybe you know that just got a Switch 2, or even yourself if you like to travel around a lot. So click the link down below in the description to learn more about the Belkin charging case. Now, if you have any other questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments, and that's kind of how I want to treat the comments section for this video. People asking questions, and then others who are more experienced with the Switch 2 answering them, or even just giving advice. So what I will do though here to start with is assume that you were able to get through the out-of-the-box setup experience. And it's pretty straightforward if you're a new Switch or Switch 2 owner. Like maybe you left the Switch 1 behind years and years ago, and you're coming back and you're just starting fresh, right? You don't have anything to transfer over. You're setting up a new Nintendo account, or even maybe signing into your old account from a while ago. Basically, you're going to be treating this as a brand new system. In that case, you went through, you got your Nintendo account set up, and you're sitting at the home menu. If you are someone who had a Switch 1 and you're moving stuff over, I would recommend, of course, moving your save data over, because there is some that is not transferable through the cloud. I'm thinking of Animal Crossing and Pokemon. Like, there are limited examples, but they do exist. I think most of the game data that's on your Switch 1, you can re-download a lot of that stuff on the Switch 2, and it'll heavily cut down the transfer time from the Switch 1 to the Switch 2 anyway, which you're going to be transferring Switch 1 stuff. There are some games, Fortnite, great example. There's a Switch 2 version and a Switch 1 version. You're going to transfer the Switch 1 version, and that's not the one you want to play on your Switch 2. All right, so that's kind of where I sit there. The thing you really want to make sure you're doing if you're transferring over through your system is to have the Switch 2 set up as your primary device. I ran into this at one point, and Nintendo is very convoluted about this for some reason. If you're coming over from a previous system, you want to make sure that one is deregistered, and it should be through a system transfer, but you can make sure by going into your eShop settings under your account, scrolling down in your account settings, and double checking your pass-enabled system that it is indeed that Switch 2. Otherwise, you'll have to deregister the old one, so don't immediately get rid of maybe your old Switch OLED, something like that, or you'll have to go online and maybe even call into customer service, and it ends up being a whole thing. Make sure your system is completely up to date, and that does include the controllers, because for some reason the system doesn't always tell you that your Joy-Con 2 controllers or your Pro controller or something needs to be updated. You just have to go through the system settings and then hit update controllers. So make sure you're good to go across the board. So from there, let's talk about those Joy-Con 2 controllers. They do snap in using magnets, as you've probably seen advertised over and over and over again with that Switch 2 snap, that sound effect. But what's really cool is the Switch 2 Joy-Cons are designed to go in all kinds of different ways onto the side of the system. Basically, if you drop it onto the system upside down, or one side on the other for some reason, it won't break the system. It's a nice safety precaution, and I mean, I guess you can play your Switch 2 upside down if you would like. You also do have mouse support for the Switch 2 Joy-Con by turning it 90 degrees and then placing it sideways on a table or even on your lap. And it also works left or right Joy-Con. So they are thinking about, I mean, Nintendo, left-handed people out there. It is a good way, I think, to navigate, say, the eShop, because then it's more of a point and click scenario. Let's go over some settings that I think are worth looking into immediately when you get your system. The first one having to do with the battery. And since the battery on the Switch 2 is sealed in the system, meaning you have to take out screws and completely open the device and then rip the battery out because it's glued into just the structure of the system, you probably want to make sure it's going to be as healthy as possible, as long as possible. In order to do that, if you go into your settings, there is a toggle that will make it so that it stops charging around 80 to 90%. And this is common now. I'm seeing this pop up more and more with all kinds of electronics. And the idea here is if you don't fully charge the battery, it'll always kind of be cycling through the different cells inside, and then meaning it'll help to reduce loss of battery capacity over time. So let's say you're around the house a lot with your Switch 2. You typically don't use it for more than maybe an hour or two per play session. You'll be perfectly fine toggling this on. Now, if maybe you're going to go on a longer trip or you're going to be away from the house for a while, you can just go ahead and turn this off and just take advantage of the extra 10 to 15%. This isn't permanent. It's just a toggle that'll tell the system, hey, at that particular time, don't charge beyond, say, 85%. The display section is going to be very important here as well. Of course, if you have a nice TV that you're going to be using through dock mode, turn HDR on. And I would recommend for HDR mode to have it at compatible software. You can have for all software if you want, or just turn it off completely. The thing with for all software is it may try to force HDR on something that isn't really compatible or set up for it, and it can look kind of weird. So compatible software, I think, is sort of that middle ground that makes the most sense. And you also want to turn on auto low latency mode, again, as long as you have that set up for your TV. And finally, adjust your HDR. Okay, so the HDR settings, while it is okay by default, there is a lot more you can get out of, say, Mario Kart World if you go through the process of fine-tuning your HDR settings. And there are many channels that are dedicated specifically to getting the best HDR that you can out of your TV. One in particular, HD TV Test, has even come back and done updates for the Switch 2, as Nintendo themselves have put out system updates that have affected the HDR tuning you can do on this system, making it a bit better with each update. So yeah, definitely keep an eye on their channel. Oh, and turn on 120 hertz support. The screen and handheld mode already has that set up. And then if you have a TV that also has 120 hertz support, any compatible software will immediately have that enabled. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be something that hits 120 frames. 40 frames per second seems to also be something that's on the table and used at times. So just throwing that out there, I think it's worth having on just about across the board. And then you also have your different themes, which are still just two. It's light or dark mode for the most part, as you've probably seen by now. I prefer dark mode. It's just, if you want, I guess, the iPad bright experience, go for light mode, but I've just become used to dark mode for like everything at this point. That's just how it is. There is an entire accessibility tab that is worth going through because you have text to speech. There's also the ability to change the font and blow it up completely. And it even has a zoom feature to where you can double tap home and then it'll zoom in on any one section that you have up on the screen. I do think, though, you want to turn on button remapping for the quick menu, which you can get to by holding down the home button. And while you do have auto brightness and even volume that you can affect here, I think having the button remapping accessible right there is great, because that means you can pull this up mid-game and set up the controls as you would like. And when I say button remapping, I mean it. Like, Nintendo is not messing around here. You can change up all kinds of stuff. You can flip the left and right sticks functionality. Maybe if you want the left stick to, say, look around and right stick to move your character, or if you're someone who's been with Xbox for a while and you don't really like that A and B have been flipped, you can flip them right back if you want. Okay, now let's talk about games, starting with backwards compatibility. This question has come up a lot, but yes, 95%, I'd say, maybe a little more, of Switch 1 games work fine on the Switch too. There are some problematic titles here and there. Nintendo has been updating as they've gone along, and I think for the most part have done a good job fixing them up. There's still a few stragglers and some that'll just probably never work. Labo, I mean, a lot of that does rely on the size of the Switch One. I mean, the Switch OLED doesn't even work with Labo. So there are just some that will probably never work. But for the most part, Switch One games that you were playing years ago should still work here, and they'll run better, which is pretty cool. So resolution that maybe was kind of sketchy on the Switch One, while it's still being blown up, say on the Switch 2 1080p display, it's not dropping resolution much at all with the dynamic resolution. Frame rate is going to be much more steady. If it's capped at 30, it'll probably run at 30. If it's uncapped, you'll probably get 60. One great example is Red Faction Gorilla. That's an uncapped frame rate on the Switch 1, and then on the Switch 2, even with stuff blowing up all over the place, destruction, it's just running at a locked 60 frames. Now, moving over to the Switch 2, there are many different variations of these games. So there's Switch 2 editions, there's enhanced games, and then there's exclusive games. So the Switch 2 editions you may have seen already with Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, those being like the two big ones that were there at launch. The idea being these are Switch 1 games that have seen new life on the Switch 2 with all kinds of enhancements, and typically you'll see Nintendo advertise them as like Switch 2 games. Really, they're Switch 1 games that just have these patches on top. I will say Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom look awesome and run really well on the Switch 2, but for the most part, that's what you're running into, and a lot of times you'll see it with additional fees on top. Now, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are also tied into NSO, which we'll get here to in a little bit. But just understand some of these editions will have a $10 fee on top, minimum. So that way it's not, oh, just buy the Switch 1 version for 60 and save money. No, it's they're going to get their 70 one way or the other. But there are some Switch 1 games that have seen more minor enhancements. It doesn't go as far as what we see with the Switch 2 enhanced games, but there are patches that say make Zelda Echoes of Wisdom run much better. Something like Mario Odyssey look and run better, or Pokemon Scarlet and Violet playable. I mean, seriously, that might be the biggest change I've seen so far, is how the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet games run on the Switch 2 versus the Switch 1. It's legitimately night and day. And then, of course, you just have your Switch 2 exclusive games. Think of your Mario Kart World, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Kirby Air Riders, Metroid Prime 4. I mean, the list goes on there. But those are games that are only going to work then on the Switch 2. Moving over to the eShop, this is where you'll be buying like all of your digital games or subscribing to memberships or what have you. And first, I will recommend, if you have access to your network through an Ethernet cable, go ahead and plug it into your dock. There is an Ethernet port back there. And I've noticed that the Switch 2 and for Wi-Fi, the download is definitely slower than when I have it plugged in through Ethernet. And I figure, hey, maybe it's just my router or something, but it seems like that's a common theme for a lot of people. So if you were able to plug it in through Ethernet, especially if you're downloading any larger games, and what you're going to find out with the Switch 2, there are many that are getting closer and closer to that 100 gigabyte mark. But with that in mind, this eShop is much better to browse on the Switch 2 than it was on the Switch 1. It got pretty ugly. Still, you can browse the eShop on, say, on Nintendo's website or through third-party websites like Deku Deals, and then when they have the selection up, it'll shoot you over to the eShop, which you can then buy it through the browser and have it load up on your Switch 2 right then and there. Like, you don't have to touch your system at all for it to start loading up, provided that your Switch 2 is connected to the internet. So you could even do this at work if there's a game that you want to play when you get home. If you have 5 minutes where you can sneak away and open a browser and buy it and then tell your Switch to download it, it'll probably be ready by the time you get home. Oh, and there are also a bunch of free-to-play games you can take advantage of, the big ones being, say, Fortnite, of course, Apex Legends. A little shout out there to DC Universe that does run pretty well on the Switch 2 through backwards compatibility, and you can find these pretty easily through the filtering. If you go to the search tab on the Switch eShop and then scroll down, you'll see filters. at which point you can just have the price set to free. And there will be some downloadable free add-on stuff that gets mixed in, but you should be able to scroll through in a much smoother fashion here with the Switch 2 and find all kinds of games that you don't have to pay for and you can jump into immediately. You can do the same thing with demos, and there are a lot of demos, like some for like just Nintendo first party games that come out after the game releases, like Donkey Kong Bonanza, all kinds of third-party games, even new and upcoming ones like Final Fantasy VII Remake Integrate. I mean, there's a lot of free stuff out there if you just want to try different games or jump into some of these big live service free-to-play adventures. Now, I mentioned NSO earlier, and if you've been kind of out of the loop on Nintendo Switch Online for a few years now, and you're coming back to it, you might be shocked at the lineup because it's actually quite large. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of games. And now with the Switch 2, GameCube has been thrown into the mix. And while it is growing, it's like 6 or 7 titles currently. They're good titles. I mean, like F-Zero in there, Wind Waker, Luigi's Mansion. This still has some room to grow. There's still plenty of stuff Nintendo has said is going into the service. But outside of that, I mean, Game Boy Advance, N64, Super Nintendo, and more. There is a lot here for what ends up amounting to $50 a year. And it's to the point where I think that service at that price could stand up on its own without the need to pay to play online. There is a lot of content here. So if you want something that just gets you off and running and you'll have access to a bunch of games, yes, that are calling out from nostalgia, I think it's hard to argue with it at this time. Maybe when it first showed up and there was 20 games, but now it's $50 a year for hundreds of titles. I understand why someone might look at that and go, you know what? Yeah, I'll throw $50 in for the year and check out all kinds of stuff. At the very least, you could do 1 month and see what you think then, but do not leave it set to renew every month because then you're just kind of throwing money away and paying more than double what you would for the 1-year subscription. Game Share is another feature that has been introduced here, and it's kind of interesting. So it lets you have a connection set from your Switch 2 to other Switch systems. It doesn't have to be a 2, by the way. You could have a Switch 1 connect to your Switch 2, at which point it'll allow you to play different, say, multiplayer games. Like Split Fiction is one of them. I had Fast RMX being another. WWE 2K25 was actually pretty good. And while it doesn't have to be local, as in you had to be in the same room, you can do it online. Like you can have people connect directly to you through game chat, which is a whole other thing where you can chat with people almost in a Discord-like manner, but then you can all play together using one copy of the game. It's a cool feature that I would like to see used more because it is kind of like unsure almost if a game is going to take advantage of it, but when they do and it works well, which also is not always guaranteed, it's a pretty cool and convenient experience. Storage is also going to be coming up here because while there's 256 gigabytes on board, one, you don't get all of that anyway because some of it is allotted to system resources, but two, it starts disappearing pretty quickly. I've mentioned that some of these games are getting larger, so even when you start downloading demos or free-to-play games, you might look and go, wow, half my storage is gone after downloading just a couple of games. And even from there, we are dealing with something called the game key card. And that's basically an entitlement on the cartridge, and then you have to download the entire game. But it's still linked to that physical cartridge. So if you buy Street Fighter, understand you're going to pop that cartridge in, and then it's going to call to a server to download like 60 gigabytes. If you buy Final Fantasy VII Remake Integrate that's coming up, that's 90 gigabytes. WWE 2K25 is more than 70. The same thing with Madden or NBA. And all of a sudden, you're starting to add this up and you're like, wow, that 256 gigabytes is gone. So what you'd want to end up doing here is setting yourself up with a micro SD express card. Can't be a standard micro SD card. It has to be an express card. And that's mostly because of the faster transfer speeds that an express card has over the typical SD card. The problem we run into is it's still kind of early days for it in terms of mass consumer adoption and everything that's going on right now with a lot of SSD and other things, parts behind the scenes going up in price because of data centers eating up a lot of the supply. It might be worth taking advantage of a deal of some kind if it pops up. And what I mean by a deal is for like a 512 gigabyte card, anything under $100. That sounds really sad because it kind of is right now. And maybe in a few years, we won't be dealing with that and it'll just be much cheaper. But that's just the reality of the situation. And I mean, I guess you can just delete stuff constantly off your Switch too, but that will be something that happens more and more regularly as we go along, just with the size of these games that are already showing up. So at the very least, maybe a 256 gigabyte card. That on card from Walmart is still working fine for me, and those tend to be like $50. The 512 gigabyte was under 100 as well, so that's kind of where we are. But I do recommend getting a micro SD Express card sooner rather than later in the current state. And then finally, let's talk about some accessories you can look into for your Switch 2. The first one, it's going to be pretty obvious. It's a screen protector. I mean, this is just, it's tried and true. It's what we know with a lot of devices that have large screens, and the Switch 2 is no different here. Now, there are many different screen protectors online right now, and for the most part, you can't really go wrong. I do have a tempered glass a screen protector on mine, and the one that I got even came with the plastic guide that you set on top, and it made it very, very easy to apply it. But I've had a few of them come through now from different companies, and they all seem to do that, and they've all worked really well. I've applied two so far to the two different Switch 2 systems that I have. Really didn't have any issues there. And if you do it right, it's very difficult to see that it's on the system. That's pretty much how you want it to be anyway. Understand though, when you take your Switch 2 out of the box, it may look like it already has a screen protector, and some people have attempted to peel this off. Do not do that. Anything that was on top of the screen to protect it should have been very obvious and easy to come off. There is another layer on top that is specifically there, almost like a windshield, to where it's trying to keep any shards of plastic or glass from coming up. Don't tear that off the system. It's supposed to be there. I've already talked about a preferred case, that being the Belkin Charge case, but for grips, I do think this is kind of important for the Switch 2, because it does have some ergonomic issues in handheld mode, specifically in prolonged play sessions. Satisfy has a Zen 2 grip that I think is very, very well done. It mostly just positions your hands in a better way so you don't get hand cramps, especially if you have larger hands. And what's nice is it does still fit in the dock, so you don't have to remove it from the Switch 2 whenever you want to, say, play in docked mode. It sits right in there, no problem. As for any kind of charge stations for the Joy-Con 2s, or there's all kinds of things on Amazon that sets everything up and on like this mat, and then everything clicks in for charging. I'd only really recommend getting something like that if you really do have multiple Joy-Con controllers for one system. If you're still just operating off of the pair that you got with your Switch 2, they charge anyway when they're in the dock, so I would probably pass on those for now until you accumulate a bunch of Joy-Con 2s. The Pro controller has been talked about at length. It's a very good controller. It is. I like it quite a bit. It's kind of expensive, though. It's like $100 just about, right? Here's the thing. If you already have a Pro controller for your Switch 1, it works with the Switch 2. So do your old Joy-Cons. That's something Nintendo's kind of mentioned a bit, but not really advertised heavily, because they want to sell you the new Pro controller. But if you're content with your current Switch 1 Pro controller, or hey, if you can get one pretty cheap, might not be a bad way to go. But if you do say, you know what, I want like the best available controller right now on the Switch 2, I'd probably go with the new Pro controller. It's pretty good. But those are just a few things to take note of for your brand new Switch 2. And of course, have fun. There's a lot of stuff to play on the system, especially going back to the Switch 1 with games that were almost unapproachable with the performance that run fine now. And then also a bunch of new games that have been coming out, especially with third-party games that are all of a sudden making the jump to Nintendo's platform. But of course, let me know down below in the comments if you have any other questions, or if you're someone who has some advice that maybe I missed out on here for the Switch 2, leave it down in the comments. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.